Did you not make it to church this week? Or maybe you don't have a church, but we got church right now. So stay tuned for Reach Out and Live. Welcome to Reach Out and Live, a program of music, scripture, and sermon brought to you each week by the many viewers and members of First-Plymouth Church, Lincoln, Nebraska. My name's Jim, minister here at First-Plymouth. Now this week we have our other preacher, Juan Huertas, preaching a good word on Nehemiah. We also have our First-Plymouth choir. The congregation has now gathered, so let's join them.
From the words of Nehemiah himself, in the second chapter comes our scripture this morning. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was served to him, I carried the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before, so the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This can only be sadness of the heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "May the kings live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my ancestors' graves, lies waste and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask that you send me to Judea, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it."
It was the fall of 1989, and Hurricane Hugo was coming in the northern Atlantic. Its eye was going to graze the community that I lived in at the time. Well, when you live in the Caribbean, you are used to these things, so we got everything ready. We had water and we had food, we had batteries, we had a radio. Pretty quickly, the winds began to pick up, and we clustered in an inner room of our house. Our house was built with concrete blocks, so as the wind began to pick up, all of a sudden it got so strong that we could feel the vibrations on the outer wall. The lights went out, and it was a long, long night. Early the next morning, the winds were still very strong, and we got to peeking out the window, and there was debris right all over the place. It was being picked up by the wind like pieces of paper, and the storm kept on and kept on and kept on. By the time the next day came, it was quiet. If you ever lived through a hurricane, you know that quietness. The humidity really high, hot, sticky, no power, no water. It was overwhelming. We decided the only way we would get relief from the heat would be to get in our car and drive around. I know they tell you never do that, but that's what we did. We drove around. And pretty quickly, the devastation became evident all around us. Little did I know at that moment, in the late 80s, that I would spend most of my life in hurricane zones, and that I would live that pattern a number of times after that one. And often when folks are not in those places, people watch it on television or see it on the Weather Channel, and they wonder, why do people still live there? You get back at it and you rebuild and you stay there, and then it happens again and again. And it's easy to say that. It's exactly what happened to Nehemiah today. He saw his town devastated by the force of the Babylonian Empire, and he has been sent into exile, and now he had risen to the top layers of the administration, and he looks back at his hometown and sees it devastated and destroyed, and his heart is stirred up, and he says, how can I continue to live like this when the town of my ancestors is devastated, where the graves of my forefathers and foremothers? We rebuild because it's home. We rebuild because that's where our rootedness lies. We rebuild because that's where our people live. We rebuild because, is there another way? But if we're honest with ourselves, the reality of it is that in our lives, we are human beings are actually all about rebuilding. We have all these things that happen in our lives that cause us to evaluate and have to rebuild again. We know what it's like to experience devastation. It might not be the devastation of a hurricane or the devastation of a flood or the devastation of an earthquake or the devastation of a tornado, but it could be the devastation of a loss of a job. It could be the devastation of a relationship that has ended. It could be the devastation of a diagnosis received. It could be the devastation of a change that we didn't expect. It doesn't matter what it is. Humans are built for rebuilding. The question becomes, how do we go about rebuilding? And I think Nehemiah, in this beautiful narrative today, gives us some insights into what the experience of rebuilding might look like. Whether you're trying to rebuild a neighborhood or a city, or you're trying to rebuild a workplace, or you're trying to rebuild a church, or you're trying to rebuild your life again in the midst of its own devastation. If you notice in the text that there's one thing that he does at the beginning that I think is quite telling for any rebuilding work. The tendency in the midst of the mess is to want to jump at that mess. Can I tell you how quickly that can happen in our minds? The storm is over, and you look around, there's all this devastation, and the tendency is to single-handedly begin to fix it back. Oh, that would be a mistake. Because so often in the midst of that anxiety, in the midst of that fear, in the midst of that struggle, you actually don't quite even know what's needed. You might spend your energies on something that's not even needed anymore. We know that from pandemics too, don't we? You know, there were many things we used to do before the pandemic that now we found that we can't remember why we did them. It happens in our lives too. So the first thing that Nehemiah does, he assesses the damage. He walks section by section in Jerusalem and assesses the damage. You know what he found? What at first looked like utter devastation, he then realized as he assessed that there were sections of the wall that were just fine. Maybe they needed a little cleanup, but overall they were okay. So often in our lives, if we don't assess first, we miss the segments that might just be okay. We so caught up in the hopelessness of the moment that we don't see possibility any longer. So he goes segment by segment and assesses the damage. He maps it out like a good leader. He makes sure that he remembers it. And then he does something else that's pretty interesting. He doesn't just assess the damage. As he's walking along the wall, he assesses the gift sets that are around the community. Where are the bricklayers and the carpenters? Where are the engineering types? Or where are the people like me who cannot help you build anything? I can be a good cheerleader, though. I can bring water and food and go, yay, keep on building, folks. That's my gift. So he assesses the gifts that are found there in each section. And in each section, he's assessing gifts. By the way, in every community, there are so many gifts. If you haven't heard, there's something called asset-based community development that's all about this. It's about assessing the gifts. So in every community, there are so many gifts. There are gifts right here, right now, in this moment. In fact, more gifts that we could never utilize, sitting right here in this moment. So it's really good often in the midst of crises to not just go to hopelessness, but to assess the gifts. So he assesses the damage, he assesses the gifts, and then he does something fascinating. He aligns the needs with the gifts. Oh, it sounds simple, doesn't it? It kind of sounds like obvious, but so often in the midst of struggle, we tend to kind of get so disoriented that we don't do that. Even in our own personal lives, we tend not to do that. We tend to think that everything's terrible and horrible and it will never end. But the reality of it is that there are needs, there are gifts, and then we need to align them. So if this section of wall needed masons, he gathered masons around that section of wall. In fact, he did more than that. He actually moved the masons, he moved the gifts next to that section of the wall, so they created this community around rebuilding. So he put these little pockets of gift sets where they were needed most. And so often in the midst of struggle, trials, tribulations, and disaster, we have a tendency to want to go at it alone. It never works. We're not alone, and we'll never rebuild alone. So Nehemiah built these communities around each section of the destroyed wall so that they could together go about the work of rebuilding. So whether it's a wall, whether it's a neighborhood or a community or a church, we need to build that community around that need with the multiplicity of gifts. Only then can you begin to see movement forward. Only then can actual reconstruction happen. So imagine this in our own personal lives. What communities do we need to build around our rebuilding needs? Oh, by the way, we just had a baptism. There's no better and most important work than helping shape a new life, a new human. And did you hear what we said? We said we have godparents, we have communities. So this child is going to need all of us, and we actually mean that. Imagine in our communities how many children would benefit if we came alongside them with our multiplicity of gifts. Now that's some rebuilding that sounds really, really exciting. So whatever it is, we're gonna utilize those gift sets in the midst of our lives and know that only then can we be better, stronger. The movement does indeed happen then. But will it surprise you that as Nehemiah began to rebuild, the sections of town were beginning to look better, right? There was excitement around this rebuilding process. The buzz was really good and positive. The headlines on the local newspaper were pretty good. But will it remind you, will it surprise you that all of a sudden something happened? Not everyone was happy about it. In other words, there were some naysayers in the bunch. A long time ago, I had a senior minister tell me, remember, Juan Carlos, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there'll be 3 negative people. They're going to keep the community from moving forward. But we know that in our own lives, don't we? Maybe you've decided to change something about your life, right? Maybe you've decided to rebuild something. There's always that friend who says, I've seen you fail so many times. What makes you think it's different this time? Or when we try to maybe change the culture in our workplace, there's always the 3 employees who just don't get in the bandwagon. Or even in the church sometimes. Now, not you, First-Plymouth. You do good. But in so many communities, there's always some of us who just can't stand moving forward and rebuilding for a variety of reasons. In fact, in Nehemiah's day, some of them were just happy with the way things were. And we might not understand it, but some of us actually get used to devastation. Some of us get used to things not working well. Some of us get used to relationships that are not good. Some of us get used to toxic environments, right? And so we just don't think there's any help needed. Why are we changing it, we say? So what did Nehemiah do? He just said, stop it. No, I'm serious. It's quite telling. I'm not sure whether Nehemiah has good gifts for pastoral leadership. He wasn't very pastoral at all, but he basically just told people to stop the whining, stop the complaining, stop the negativity. Let's get with the program here. Some years ago, I was serving a congregation, and things were kind of getting a little tough with some of the changes that were needed. And the phrase that became kind of the strong phrase by this small group of folks was, it cannot be done. It cannot be done. It cannot be done. So the pastor was getting frustrated. And about a few days into my week, the board chair showed up in my office in the middle of the day and said, Pastor Juan Carlos, I have something for you. He gave me a gift. And it was a bumper sticker. And he said this, those who said that it can be done, get out of the way of those of us who are doing it. And I still have that bumper sticker in my office today. Okay, you don't think it can get done? Awesome. Move on and let the rest of us get to it. And then something else happened. This happens in our own lives too. So some were negative, others were entrepreneurial. Let me tell you what happened. There were some folks who were living next to those walls being rebuilt who didn't have the financial resources to rebuild those walls, so that section. And so some folks who had the means decided that they would help. Guess what they did? They went to these folks and said, I tell you what, you cannot rebuild your section of the wall, so we're going to buy you out. We're going to buy your property. That will give you the resources to build the wall. And then we're going to lease you your property back to you so you don't have to move. Often in rebuilding processes, there are people who take advantage of the others. in the midst of that rebuilding process. They take advantage of them for a variety of reasons, for their own greed, their own power, their own control, for their own moving forward. What Nehemiah did is what we should do too. And this happens in everything, whether it's your workplace, your community, your home, your family, whether it is our shared life together, in our civic discourse. We should say what Nehemiah said: stop taking advantage of the least of these. That cannot happen here. You cannot take advantage of your brothers and sisters who are trying to move forward in life. And so they created a common agreement so that this kind of thing doesn't happen. I saw this during hurricane season all the time. When there was a shortage of gas, then gas would go up. Shortage of water, water will go up. Tarps, I've never seen such expensive tarps in my life. I could buy them for $3 at Walmart last week. So the church began to collect things like that. And that way, when the emergency came, guess what we could do? We could make sure that our neighbors were not being taken advantage of. We could give them the tarp and the water and the toilet paper, right? The important things in life. We, being voices of a just way forward in the midst of transformation. At first, it was really difficult because rebuilding is difficult work. It's hard work. Whether you're rebuilding a city or you're rebuilding a life, it can be a kind of project that we feel will never get done. But day by day, moment by moment, year after year, the city began to buzz with life again. All of a sudden, it looked like the glory days. And folks that had left it began to move back into the city. Other folks who've been pushed out because of how difficult the situation was, they began to come back again. And little by little, what seemed hopeless at the time, all of a sudden began to seem like life again, like we were used to it again. It began to thrive, and all people began to see themselves here in this place. New life had indeed taken place. What seemed hopeless years before was now right there before us in a new day, in a new way. Oh, it took a long time. And it took a lot of work. And it took a lot of steps. And there were 2 steps forward and 1 step back, more than once. But day by day, little by little, the New Jerusalem emerged. Day by day, little by little, your new life might just emerge. Our new life together might just emerge. Our life together in the city might just emerge. The question for us becomes, are we willing to go on the journey of rebuilding? Or are we just happy with the way things are? Oh, I have a hunch, First-Plymouthers, that we are a rebuilding people, ready to go on the journey with our gifts, graces, and abilities, so that our neighbors, and those of us here too, can experience new life, good news, joy, peace, human flourishing at its finest. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Surely in temples made with hands, God the Most High is not dwelling. High above earth God's temple stands, all earthly temples excelling. Yet he whom heavens cannot contain chose to abide on earth with us, built in our bodies his
I think it's just wonderful that we could worship together. I hope it has opened your heart to God. Do you know you could join our worship services live every Sunday morning at 9, 10:30, or 11:59 on Facebook, or YouTube, or our website? And all of that is made possible by gifts from people like you.
If you believe that an open-minded, loving congregation can help change the world, then consider making a donation. It will help us increase the love of God and neighbor, both in Nebraska and the world. If you would like to learn more about our church, go to firstplymouth.org. You can watch videos of the sermons, learn about our many programs and missions, then follow us to Facebook and become a friend.
We now worship online at 9 a.m. and 10:30 on YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, and our website. We also add live events, so join us online. Most often, I close our worship services with a specific benediction. I say, hold fast to what is good, return no one evil for evil, and find your joy in serving others. Well, if you can do that this week, you can reach out and live.
Tune in again next week for another edition of Reach Out and Live.